I think that the movie is doing that deliberately, right? Because I do think they're trying to engage with an ambiguity of, is this guy actually magical or not? Because the longer we're able to believe that maybe he is, the more we're willing to get fooled by what's happening. Welcome, friends, to episode 249 of the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book and then see the movie. I'm writer Luke Elliott.
And I'm filmmaker James Bailey.
And this week we discuss Steven Millhauser's 1990 short story and Neil Berger's 2006 film, The Illusionist. So, James, I wanted to know, have you ever tried to learn any magic? Are you an amateur magician at all?
I definitely had a little magic kick. We're talking like maybe a couple months, but I was like watching David Blaine and doing, watching like, what's the other guy's name? Angel?
Oh, Chris Angel.
Yeah, like that
Mind
kind
Freak.
of stuff. And Mind Freak, yeah. And I think like I bought magic shops were really cool too. I remember going to a few magic shops and buying some of the stuff, and it was always fun to try to learn the tricks, but I never dove into it as much as I would have hoped.
Sounds like a little more than me then. I had a phase where I definitely tried to learn some like card tricks and sleight of hand stuff, but I immediately realized it was not for me. I just didn't have the like coordination, the memory for like exactly how to do all these little finicky things. And you have to be so precise. And to fool people is just so hard. I have a lot of respect for it, right? Like whenever people are incredibly good at this stuff, it really amazes me. So I was definitely interested by it, but just could never pull it off, honestly. So I never got super into it.
Admittedly, I never got good enough to trick anybody. It was more just like I tried some stuff. I got like a wallet that would like you'd like set it on fire and then slap it shut, that kind of thing.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
None of mine involve fire.
Just like little magic trick kind of knickknacks that you can buy, I remember getting.
So, I mean, and that's, I bring it up because we're covering The Illusionist, so we're talking about magic, and we read the short story, which is called Eisenheim the Illusionist by Steven Millhauser, which we'll start off with. I think let's talk about this first. It's pretty short, I think it was like 20 pages, available for free online. If you're curious, you can find it. And yeah, let's focus on that first, I guess. We had both seen, just for a quick history with the material, we had both seen this before, right?
Right, yeah. But we also talked when we were selecting the project how we didn't remember it a ton, but I kind of remembered liking it.
I remember having a good time. I think I saw it in the theater in 2006, is my guess. So it's been, over 15 years now. So yep. A lot of that has been lost to time until watching it this time. But yeah, I'm going to hold off on all the thoughts I have about the movie, I guess. But as far as the short story goes, I had never read this before. This was brand new to me. I actually didn't even know how old it was when I was reading it. I didn't look up when it was published until after I read it, which was a little surprising because I thought this was an older story than 1990.
Yeah,
because it felt like it was written in like an old style. Now, it is kind of like a history. It feels like you're almost reading like a biography of Eisenheim. And so that gives it kind of like a textbook feel. And maybe that's contributing to it feeling a little older.
It could really just be from any time.
Yeah, that's the thing. And it's like almost like a contemporary of his was writing a biography about him. So it had the feel of like the person writing it.
Do you think that the time period it's set in like maybe made you think it was a little bit older as well?
Well, that's possible. Yeah, I don't know. It was an interesting effect because I was thinking I was going to look it up and it was like, oh, this is going to be a story from 1945 or 1961 or I don't know, somewhere in that range, like an older story, but no, 1990. And so then I looked into the author and Steven Millhauser, still alive. He is, according to Wikipedia, 79 years old now. He's an American novelist and short story writer. He won a Pulitzer for his fiction and for his novel, specifically, Martin Dressler, in 1997. So, has other things he's well known for, but it looks like he's most well known for this story now, just because of the adaptation, I think, right? And anytime you get an adaptation that at least does okay, that's going to become the thing you're known for better or worse. I don't know if this, like, I kind of doubt this is his best story, but now he's really well known for it. He did have another novel that he was well known for called Edwin Mulhouse. And that was in 1972, was his debut. And apparently it did pretty well. I was looking into him. He's a New York guy, grew up in Connecticut, has his bachelor's from Columbia. He then pursued a doctorate at Brown. So kind of an Ivy League, New York, that New England writer. And he sounds like he was in a lot of the like academic literary circles. And it seems like a lot of his fiction, just from the little bit I was able to find, straddles that line between like fantasy and literary. He likes to play with that, and that's definitely on display here. It sounds like some of his stuff is like full on fantasy. Although, I'd be curious to know if he like it embraces that or tries to stay away from that label, because as we've talked about, genre can sometimes be viewed in the negative light, especially when you're on the like literary highbrow side of fiction writing. Yeah,
but we like it when people lean into it, embrace it.
Yeah, I do think it is those lines are being blurred more and more these days. Not to say there aren't like staunch holdouts, there absolutely are, but I don't know. It's just it's an interesting sort of conversation within the writing circles, but I still don't know how interesting it is to people outside of it. But if you're within these circles, you'll occasionally find people are very passionate about it, and it always catches me by surprise. He released this collection called the Barnum Museum in 1990. This story, Eisenheim the Illusionist, was the final story in the collection.
There must be something at play there with like Barnum and Bailey circus kind of thing, right? If he's releasing something under the name Barnum.
The Barnum Museum. Yeah, so the Barnum Museum, I guess, let me look. It's based off of a real place, I believe. Barnum Museum is in Bridgeport, Connecticut, with a collection related to P.T. Barnum, which is that Barnum and Bailey?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay. Yeah, so it seems like the collection, and I'm looking at like even just like the artwork for the cover looks fantastical. So it seems like this is kind of a fantasy theme, at least, collection of short stories.
Well, and P.T. Barnum is like that showman circus kind of thing. So it seems like a magician fits along with that illusionist kind of thing. So cool to know. The story itself, I liked the take. Kind of liked that biography feel, because it gives it the secondhand nature of if you have a character that's going to these shows and seeing these tricks performed, it's a little more like the mystery isn't being revealed, but we were kind of seeing behind the scenes sometimes and hearing how tricks were being performed. And I think that's interesting for a magician to sort of somehow within the biography for his secrets to be revealed.
It's a little bit of that, because I do think there's a little bit of distance, because I definitely got the sense that like the narrator who was giving the history didn't know for sure. It was reported that this was how he did it, and this other person who studied it extensively claims that it was this, or it was very similar to this other trick that this other magician performed. But there was definitely a lot, like one of the most interesting things about the story, I think. And I'm going to admit that like I didn't love this story. I thought it was interesting, it was cool. There were moments that really intrigued me. But I didn't get super drawn in and engaged on a narrative level, and I think it's because of the format and that sort of textbook feel. But one of the things that I think is working best in the story and is very cool is the sort of distance between what the truth is and what the perceived truth is, and how storytelling conveys what truth is for later audiences. So we're kind of getting the mystique and the myth of this illusionist, but engaging with it as if it exists in our sort of real world without magic. Although some people think there is magic, but like the rational side of me is like approaching this as this guy was a, quote unquote magician. But they're definitely playing with this idea of like maybe there is real magic, and maybe he did do real magic, and the evidence being presented is like all these people kind of believed in it, and there's a gray area that's left for the reader to decide like what's really going on here.
And how the legend grows over time, right? When people see, if you go see the show, if you're so fascinated by it and you believe it, you might go tell your friend, and maybe extrapolate a little bit, or like you might exaggerate the story a little bit.
I also really liked how this reminds me a little bit of The Name of the Wind, which have you read The Name of the Wind?
The first half. I've talked about it before, yeah. And then I had to stop because of the podcast.
Yeah, one of the things I like about that is it does deal with like the nature of storytelling. And I was getting the sense that Eisenheim, as he's being described, is a character who knows the power of his reputation and uses that to his advantage. And one of the coolest parts that is in the story that didn't make it to the movie was there was this whole sequence where, first off, he like runs one dude out of town. I think he makes him disappear on stage and he's never seen again, his like actual rival. And then
or did his rival make himself disappear?
Who knows? Yeah. It's unclear, right? And that's the whole thing. It's like there was rumors Eisenheim did it. There was rumors that it was like an accident or he made himself disappear to save face. But then there's this other rival shows up and they have this like ongoing back and forth competition where they're like playing every other night. At first they don't even address each other, but then there starts to be this like infighting and they're one-upping each other and doing the same trick but like taking it to extreme new levels, and everybody's just caught in the thrall of this. And then there's the big reveal where Eisenheim pulls off a mask and reveals that he is this rival. I think his name was like Passau or something. So he's his own rival, and he's been like doing this whole thing back and forth, but he's both people. I thought that was really cool, and it didn't make it into the movie, but it was really neat.
Something that I'll touch on more in the film, but it's this idea of like art being spoken about in performative ways, and specifically with adaptation. When we get there, the ways that people think of film and people think of storytelling in general, and how it is magic, and how there's almost like you're doing something to the audience and influencing them subliminally in ways, and maybe there's some deception there, and this idea of like art and deception and the way that like those two things go together, and sometimes it can be a little malicious and sometimes it can be a little just like more clever, and just the way that those two things interplay. I think there's less of that in the story. There's a little bit of it, but when we get to the film, you're kind of starting to see a little bit of that, like you said, with what Rothfuss does, this idea of like storytelling and the nature of like storytelling with magic and storytelling with like legacy and things like that.
Legend, myth,
yeah.
All of that, right? Yeah, and that's all definitely coming into play here. As we hear the evolution of the character, he starts one-upping himself, then he disappears for like a year, and then he comes back and he has this new show. And this new show involves the use of like summoning specters and spirits onto stage. And the effect of that is described as like almost starting a religious movement, as people start to think he is this true, I don't know, spiritualist or something who can actually contact the dead. Because of this, the government gets upset at him for possibly like rabble rousing and, leading people down false roads, I guess. I don't know.
Disturbing the peace.
Disturbing the peace. And so a bunch of police come to his shows to arrest him. And then on the final night, when he's going to give his final performance, he himself disappears. And right when they're going to apprehend him. And that basically ends the story. That's like kind of like the final act of Eisenheim is to disappear. It was a cool moment, and I can see why someone would read it and think like this would make for a good movie. But I feel like there is a lot of narrative connective tissue missing in the story, and it's because of the format, where it like didn't really fit to have it.
Well, we don't even really get a ton of his backstory or any context.
Well, we hear that he's a cabinet maker, which does make it into the movie, and like I like that a lot. Like the idea of a cabinet maker being particularly good at like hidden compartments. That's cool. But yeah, you're right. Other than that, it's a lot of like, oh, he went and disappeared for a number of years where he studied the mysteries over in, Asia or whatever.
So we don't get a lot about him. We kind of just get this snapshot of his life and some of the performances, and we hear, and I think another thing that you probably were pushing back against, and I felt myself at times, I guess I didn't really thought of it that much, but when I was reading through how some of the tricks were performed, it was a lot of like, this trick was done this way, and like you said, it was maybe somebody interpreting it, or that was their perception on how he was able to do it. But it would get really into the minutia of that, and it would be like, and then this trick, you do this, and then the audience does this, and then this. And that kind of was there was like a few good chunks of that throughout the story, where they want you to get lost in the magic trick, and I felt myself like, I'm like, this works so much better visually. I feel
Yeah, if
like
you could see it. Yeah, that's totally true. It's like the pluses and minuses of each medium. I do think the is he or isn't he actually magical thing works well here. Like, we're already at a remove. We're being told through the eyes of another character, unnamed, but just whoever's like writing this biography. So it works pretty well. I had a pretty good time with it. One thing that it did do was set me up to watch the movie in a new light, because I had all this information going in. I had a lot of these moments, because there are a few moments described of like particular performances he gave and what his illusions looked like. And I was surprised at the number of them that made it directly into the movie.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
Even the orange tree supposedly was a real trick that was performed.
Yes, I have heard that it is a real trick. It is interesting that we do eventually see a diagram for it in the movie. And yeah, I have heard that it is a real thing. I watched some like magician reacts video. Like, this was I think like a year ago. And that was like my one thing about the Illusionist that I saw. And in that magician reacts video, he was talking about different tricks as portrayed in these movies. And this one came up, specifically the orange tree, and him talking about how, oh yeah, that so and so did this, or back in this year, and this was a real trick, and all that stuff. It was very interesting.
I mean, cool to know the fruit's real, and it's these mechanisms. It seems like it's very intricate, and like, especially for the time, like the inventive nature, I think, of magicians too, like comes to mind, and this all gets tied up in this conversation I want to have about the film, because a lot of like Edison and a lot of early inventors were also involved in like early days of filmmaking, and some of these techniques that came about with lights and then eventually capturing, photographic images.
Yeah. Did they talk about cinematography in this story? Like, he was like an early cinematography was one of his things.
So there was talk, and there's more. I'll get into this a little bit more, but there's this stuff called phantascope, which is sort of like how he does this imagery thing, and it deals with like projection and reflections and things like that people were using. Supposedly, as far as I was able to find, is people were actually doing this for magical performances like this. So they were bringing in this idea of the fantastical and things that are impossible and making it seem real. And I could understand people in the turn of the century seeing stuff like this performed and not knowing, having never seen projection or something, and seeing this stuff happen, just being totally like enthralled by it.
Absolutely. So yeah, I mean, ultimately, I had a good time with the story. I do recommend, if you're a fan of The Illusionist, to give it a quick read, because it does give more context for the story. But if you're ready, I'm ready to dive into the movie.
Yeah, let me read you a little bit about the filmmaker first. So Neil Berger is an American filmmaker. He's known for the fake documentary Interview with the Assassin, the period drama The Illusionist, Limitless, and the sci-fi action film Divergent, based on the dystopian novel of the same name by Veronica Roth.
I've never seen that movie, but I am well aware of it.
Yeah. It was sort of like came with that crop of YA novels like The Hunger Games and some of those other ones when they were
Twilight.
Really hitting hard and like turn to the 2010s.
Yeah. That's cool he did Limitless. I actually haven't seen that either. But another movie that I like saw the trailers for, and I know roughly what it's about.
You're aware of like, drug makes you a superhuman, basically. Yeah. Berger became involved with experimental film in the 1980s and went on to direct music videos for such alternative artists as the Meat Puppets. Berger approached MTV in 1991 with the idea to create and direct a series of promotional spots for what would be the MTV Books Feed Your Head campaign against illiteracy. In association with Ridley Scott Associates, Berger directed commercials for companies such as MasterCard, IBM, and ESPN, and created a series of television spots for Amnesty International and their campaign for prisoners of conscience. So yeah, commercial work. I always think it's interesting to note when people move from commercial to film and TV and everything like that. And it seems that Berger's continued to work in the industry and direct. He directed some episodes of Billions. He had a couple of films come out. 2017, The Upside, and 2021, Voyagers.
Voyagers sounds familiar. How many of these movies have you seen?
Limitless. I haven't seen Interview with the Vampire. I saw the first Divergent.
The Assassin.
What did I say?
The Vampire.
Interview with the Assassin I have not seen. I've seen Divergent. I haven't seen any of his other films, I don't think. Billions is a show I'm aware of. I haven't seen any of. But I did hear that Voyagers, I believe, was like a massive bomb. I don't know if it had anything to do with COVID or anything like that, but it came out in 2021 and it was like I just remember hearing it was like one of the biggest bombs of the year.
Who's in that movie?
Colin Farrell's in it.
Colin Farrell's in it.
Yep.
Movie called Voyagers? I don't even remember this movie. I have no memory of it.
Sci-fi film, yeah.
You'd think I would, yeah. Maybe, yeah. I don't know. I have to look into that because I'm curious. But, okay. So this is a guy I was not familiar with. Apparently, he's a little more well known than I suspected. But I was pretty impressed with the filmmaking here. I actually think this movie looks really good most of the time. There's sort of a texture. I don't know if it's like a filter or if it's the kind of film they used or if it's a color grading thing.
Yeah, sepia tone kind of thing, right?
But they gave everything kind of a sepia tone, and like at times it really works. And I think like the performances on the stage, like that opening with the flames, and it's silent, no one's speaking.
It sells the era, right, of the time period as well with the color and some of the techniques. Like one of my favorite things is just that like in some of these flashbacks, and they were using that iris closing transition technique that I just like is so turn of the century filmmaking. Like that's the early day. Like
they're
signaling that.
Yeah, that's cool. I think this movie looks really good, and especially I think starting with that bold choice to have a moment of silence where Edward Norton is like looking super concentrating up there on something. He's focusing and he's clearly doing something, and then we just have this crowd of people just like hanging on it, right? Like they're all just hushed, and it includes all these police. And like, Paul Giamatti's there and you're like, what is going on? And it really does set the stage and like make you interested to know more. So I thought, an effective opening and a bold one. And looked really good.
Yeah. So I guess with that context, isn't it interesting that I feel that this is kind of a forgotten film now?
Yeah.
And I was looking at the box office for it as well, just because I'm like, all right, so this is a film that came out in 2006. Both of us kind of forgot about it, but it's got Edward Norton. I think in a good performance, really, for Edward Norton.
I think Edward Norton continues to be a somewhat underappreciated actor. Like, I think he's really, really good, but
oh yeah,
I don't know if I see him getting enough respect, I think. Maybe he'll get some for Glass Onion, but it's a very unusual role for him. It looks like kind of comedic. But
I think he did win an Oscar for Birdman as like best supporting actor. But yeah, I feel that he's like, I have heard that he might be a little bit difficult to work with at times. But he's also very selective about his projects now at this point. But that's just hearsay. Who knows really, but clearly he's good at.
Yeah. And you always wonder who's the person saying that and
right.
why.
but every time I see him on screen, he's great. Like I'm never like, oh, he's phoned that one in. Like he's always putting in really good performances and really is, I think, an underappreciated actor.
I think so.
So I was talking about the box office. I'm like, how many people saw this movie? Yeah. This on a budget of $16 million, this worldwide box office for this film was like $87 million.
That's successful.
Multiple 3x 4x or more. That's pretty successful, and it's interesting because I did read that like it also made like $35 million in rental revenue in 2007.
Okay.
So like a lot of people saw this movie, and what is
got some word of mouth buzz, it sounds like.
Yeah, and what's up with the disappearance of it? Like it's like when the movie ended, they disappeared, and so did the films.
I mean, I think common knowledge is, and this is something that my memory of it kind of happened, is that it got kind of swallowed by The Prestige. I think The Prestige came out around the same time, maybe after it. I think it was after it. And it was Christopher Nolan. It was this massive movie, and ultimately, I do think it's better. I need to rewatch The Prestige.
We might for the podcast.
We might,
right?
honestly. That's a good one we could cover.
I actually love that movie. There are some similar kinds of things that come up, but rather than this is sort of about like the deception, I think, of magic and filmmaking and the way that those tie together. And I think there's something about the structure of the film overall with The Prestige is like, and I've seen other people say this as well, but it's sort of like doled out to you as a magic trick. Like The Prestige is a magic trick being performed before us, whereas this is sort of like letting us in on it.
But it kind of tries to be.
It does, yeah.
Yeah. So I have some my second viewing now, going in with the background of the story and being like more critical of what I'm watching and like really paying attention. I immediately knew the twist. Now I know that some of it might be like memory of the movie, but I really think that I just like. Because I really didn't, unless it's like way buried deep in my subconscious, I didn't remember what happened in this movie at the end. But as I'm watching, I'm like, okay, this is a trick. she's still alive. We're in full spoilers, I guess. This is all not real. And when I knew that going in, I was like, are we supposed to think that she really died? Because I started to think that we were supposed to be in on it. And then after a little while, I realized, I was like, no, I think we are supposed to be fooled. This movie's treating us as if we don't know.
Oh, I think that may be the case, but I think that it's also like you're in on it. I think very clearly his character after the twist that she dies, he's not as affected as you would think, and he seems like he's plotting something, and you're like, what is he up to?
That's what I thought, but yeah. I don't think the movie, I think if the movie were to put its audience into a bucket of where they think the audience is going to think, I felt like the filmmaker was treating the audience as if we didn't know and we were fooled. Yeah,
I guess that's probably true.
And it was a little weird because I just paying attention a little bit, I felt like I was not fooled, but maybe that's some we've seen a few of these magic movies now and we kind of know that maybe we're more savvy to these tricks.
Maybe. And it's also they've added in the element of a romance, and it feels like this kind of film wanted a happy ending. So you're kind of like, what's the reconnection there? Something has to give here. It can't end with him besting this royal guy and then just sort of living out his days on his own.
Well, maybe we need to give our plot summary.
Yeah.
So we can know what we're talking about here.
Yeah, let's jump into it. So in Vienna, 1889, a magician named Eisenheim is arrested by Chief Inspector Uhl of the Vienna police during a magic show involving necromancy. Later, Uhl explains the story of Eisenheim's life to Crown Prince Leopold. Eisenheim was the son of a cabinet maker and became interested in magic. He fell in love with Sophie, the Duchess von Teschen, but the two were forbidden to see each other on account of the former being a peasant. They kept meeting secretly but were caught and separated by force. Eisenheim studied magic by traveling the world and 15 years later returned to Vienna to perform. During one performance, he encounters the adult Sophie and learns that she is expected to marry the Crown Prince Leopold, who, it is rumored, is brutal towards women and even murdered one. Leopold invites Eisenheim to conduct a private performance at the palace. During the performance, Eisenheim humiliates the Crown Prince in front of the royal guests. In response, he is banned from performing again in Vienna. When Sophie comes to offer him help, they make love. Eisenheim asks her to flee with him, but she is afraid that they will be executed. She reveals that the Crown Prince is planning a coup d'etat against his elderly father, the Emperor Franz Joseph I.
So the romance angle, I had a vague memory of there being a romance, but most of it was gone. And as it was happening, I'm like, okay, I can see why they did this. It adds personal stakes to what's going on.
Well, and kind of what you were wanting, right? You needed that narrative thrust
yes.
to get you more invested, it seemed like.
Fairly obvious way to do it, but it works. And we see this moment early on where they're huddled together and there's people looking for them, and she says, make us disappear, and he's unable to do that in this moment, and she gets captured and taken away from him. And so I'm like, all right, this really sets him down his path. He's got to get his powers better. He's got to learn how to do magic so that he can maybe one day actually do this. And it does set up what happens later, right? Where he does end up making her disappear. So that was all pretty good, and I like that. And I liked the flashback where we get, it's playing with that, what is the truth and what isn't, as we see, this guy fades away and then the tree pops out of existence and all this stuff as we're seeing the memory being told by the commissioner later on. And it's playing with that nature of fiction and the legends that can grow around people. And that all reminded me of the story, which is what the story is all about. So I thought that all worked really well too.
And I think it's interesting to note, it's been kind of hinting up to this, but the perception of an audience and what is real to them and what it means, how it can still affect you, whether it's real or not, and how that comes back to storytelling as well, right? A lot of stories that we're telling are not real, but can affect the real world. And ultimately, we keep seeing this character tell everybody, everything I'm doing is an illusion. Everything I'm doing is an illusion. And that's ultimately backs up the fact that these things don't have to be real if people believe, these ideas don't have to be real for people to sort of latch onto them and create movements and things like that. And I think we see that with some of the people in the town, right? They believe these things to be real, even though it's clearly a show that they're going to. They buy into it and they treat it as if it is real. And so it kind of doesn't matter whether it is or it isn't.
Well, even when he comes out and says it isn't real, clearly people still think it is.
Right. And that's that idea, that magic of storytelling. It doesn't matter, even if you come up to me and tell me that XYZ film or book is not real.
Frodo never threw the ring into Mordor.
It doesn't mean it can't morally and mentally change my outlook on life and how I perceive things.
Feels real to you. That is an interesting sort of meta discussion. I do think there's like a little bit less storytelling and more just like if you make people believe something strongly enough, there is sort of a runaway aspect of it where it's no longer yours and you can come out and say, no, this is all a lie. And yet it's funny how sometimes that doesn't change anything and like people will still believe it. We see that, all the time now in politics and QAnon and bullshit like that. Like people get caught up in the fantasy, and even when it's proven time and again to not be real, like they don't back off of it. So I don't know if that was something that they were like getting into way back in 2006, but maybe. And maybe like just like early, I don't know. It's like this isn't a new phenomenon. It's just like sort of internet poured gasoline on it, but talking about the same kind of stuff, I guess.
And then this idea of performance too, right? Like we have this person on stage doing something using, conceivably, if you're a rationalist and you believe that you're going to see a magic show, you're going to see somebody who's incredibly good at sleight of hand and performance work, and they're able to do something that you are like, how is that even possible? How is it possible that they were able to do that? And the way that these smoke and mirrors like are reflected in our entertainment and what we want to see. Like we want to see something that we can't believe and we never would have thought of. And that's sort of the job of these storytellers or these magicians, is like creating something that we couldn't have thought of or believed ourselves, and like how that kind of
smoke and mirrors, man. That's a funny phrase. I feel like that's got to be referencing this kind of effect, right? Because
absolutely,
literally, that's what at one point, our commissioner even has it broken down for him. Like this is probably what he's doing. We see the smoke, and then they're projecting something onto it, and it looks kind of similar, but not nearly as good. Now, the person doing it says this is a very rough approximation. But it seems like we're to look at it and go, no, that's not it. But I don't know. It's like the movie is a little bit trying to have it both ways.
It definitely is.
And I do want to talk about that as we continue on, as like one of the core tenets of this movie is the nature of the magic and whether or not it's real, and the question of whether or not it's real. And there's an ambiguity there, and like how comfortable are we with ambiguity in a movie like this? But let's back up a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about the commissioner, who is a very important character. It's sort of the eyes that the movie is viewed through in some sense, kind of an audience stand-in. He is an amateur magician himself, and clearly like kind of fanboying out, even as he's investigating. And I love that. Like I thought that was really like endearing for this character who otherwise I don't think I'd like very much.
And Paul Giamatti's great in the role too. Just totally kills it.
Yeah, he's good. And like, yeah, I loved it because like, he's trying to use, he's got his investigation, he's got his thing he's got to do, but then he's also just trying to like figure out how he does certain tricks. And then I think Eisenheim immediately catches on to that, and he gives him that little like, the hand gets paler trick or whatever, and it's kind of just like a little thing. He's like, yeah, whatever, you can have this one.
Well, and he kind of wanted to like get him off his tail, and he's like, quit bothering me. But in that same conversation, you get the part where Uhl is kind of saying like, your performance, it's high art, and he's talking about it as art, and I think that's the permission for the audience to start thinking about like, what is the filmmaker trying to say here with.
Well, and it is interesting because I feel like a lot of magicians do talk about it as art. It is definitely an odd art, right? Because there is an aspect of lying and fooling people.
Deception, yeah.
There's all this deception, yet there is an artistry to it for sure. And a showmanship and like all sorts of things that go into it. So yeah, it's a very interesting art, and there is correlations to movies and everything else. Like there is a little bit of lying and showmanship and
ultimately I think it comes down to like you're deceiving somebody, and then in order to ultimately satisfy them, to ultimately give them a payoff, to ultimately give them something that brought them joy or wowed them. So,
and this movie tries to do that. So, it is fairly tight in that sense, like thematically, it's executing on its premise. So I thought the clever turn on this character with the commissioner follows, where the next like real interaction they have, these kind of thug guys bring in Eisenheim to this restaurant, and the restaurant has been cleared, and Paul Giamatti's just sitting in there by himself, eating a meal by himself. He offers to get him a food or a drink if he wants anything. He says no, and then he has this like kind of flex, right, of like, I actually do have a good bit of power, and he kind of warns him, like, you don't want to get involved in this crown prince. I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt. You know, he says, what I'm about to say to you is not going to sound friendly, but it is. I thought a lot of that was good writing, and it showed that, like, even though this character can be kind of a fanboy, he also has a lot of power in this world, and he's not, like, afraid of Eisenheim. He kind of feels like, outside of the stage, I am actually the one who has the power here.
And ultimately, it's for his ambition, too. Like, he is beholden to this other person who's outside of the jurisdiction of the law, it seems.
Yeah, they both kind of admit that it's like, well, you know, we think we have power, but ultimately we don't. This other guy has the real power because of class. And class is a big thing in this movie. That's the difference between, Jessica Biel's character and him. Sophia, I think is her name. They're of different social standings, and that's why they're, like, not able to be together.
I like the inclusion of the romance subplot. I think it's adding a lot to the story, and it's making it so that you are invested in their character and their arc and what's going to go on throughout the story. But I also felt like it makes it more similar to other films that I've seen before in ways. Like, I think that subplot, it gets familiar, and it just feels like something that's taking away from a story that I was invested in. But ultimately the payoff is fun, but it's like this kind of, they're in the countryside together and they've found this happy life, and it just feels a little cliche. It's
like kind of reductive to a story that is otherwise kind of got this like twist and this mind-blowing thing, and it's a story about misdirection and about magic, yet when at its heart it's a love story, there's a familiarity there, and sure, familiarity can be good in some ways, but like you're saying, it's bad in others. And, you know, that is one thing I'll give to The Prestige, is it's like, that's not what that movie's really about. Although, if I remember correctly, there is like a romance element, but like that's not, if I remember, that's not like the main thrust of the movie.
I mean, the main character in this film, like ultimately his ambition or his goals is to find a way for he and this girl that he's loved forever to end up together.
And his way to do it is also to bring down like the entire monarchy, apparently, and like create a religion and like start an uprising and all this, and like have a really elaborate plot to frame the crown prince for murder that he didn't commit.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said about this movie. Like, of course, the character is moving at his own self-interest, but at the same time, there's a little bit of a thing here where he's like kind of doing right by the. Clearly, nobody wants this guy to be the leader. If you knew the behind the scenes, and so he frames this guy for something he didn't do but may have done, and so kind of, I don't know. It's an interesting thing to know, especially with this sort of Robin Hood idea of it, like this, like take down the class system. And
so the only thing we know is that his one-time manager, who I guess becomes his manager again later on, has heard a story about how the crown prince once murdered somebody.
Yeah.
It's never confirmed.
His lover, I think.
Yeah, one of his lovers. And like it's never confirmed, but I feel like Eisenheim takes it as fact, and we are supposed to too. Which, okay, you know. But ultimately, like he's just like shitty because he is royalty, and like royalty is shitty, and like I feel like especially as Americans we don't like it. But like I don't know, I kept thinking like we're blaming him for killing Sophia, but he actually didn't kill Sophia. Now, yeah, he slapped her. Like he's clearly a shitty guy, but like, did he deserve to be framed for murder? Now, maybe he did murder a past person, but like we never got that confirmed.
Right. So, well, we had people in the crowd at one point who were saying the same kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, he does seem to be a jerk. I'll give you that. So, yeah. Okay. And he's royalty, so fuck him.
I do think that Eisenheim kind of decided to just like, you know, do his own thing.
He couldn't just get Sophia out of there. He also had to like fuck that guy especially.
Yeah. Let's read some more of this plot to get to that point. At the Mayerling hunting lodge, Sophie tries to end her engagement with Leopold. Her body is discovered the next morning in the Vienna woods. An unknown man is blamed. That's the other thing, right? Like blaming an unknown man for a crime because he has the pull of the police force is pretty fucked. Although you could say that Eisenheim is technically blaming an innocent man for something he didn't do also, so it's kind of the same crime.
Well, yeah. At least it's a guy who may or may not be guilty from a past crime he was never.
He at least is a woman beater, so
at the very least, yeah.
So he deserves to be in jail. This throws Eisenheim into depression. He buys a theater and begins a new series of magic shows, this time focusing on the summoning of dead spirits. Leopold secretly attends one, during which Eisenheim summons the spirit of Sophie, who says that someone in the theater is her murderer. Leopold, unnerved, orders Uhl to arrest Eisenheim for fraud, but Eisenheim avoids jail by confessing to the public that his show is an illusion. Eisenheim is threatened that if he summons Sophie in his next performance, he will be in prison. Uhl attends the performance, and in spite of the warnings, Eisenheim summons Sophie again. Uhl storms the stage with his officers, but to the shock of the audience, Eisenheim is revealed to be a spirit when Uhl's hand passes through him. Uhl reveals to Leopold that he has found evidence, a jewel from Leopold's sword and Sophie's locket, which could implicate Leopold in Sophie's murder. Uhl has already informed the emperor and the Austro-Hungarian general staff of Leopold's conspiracy to seize the throne. As officers of the Imperial Guard of the Austro-Hungarian army arrive, Leopold shoots himself in the head. Uhl leaves and places Sophie's locket in his pocket. He is now no longer chief inspector of police. As a boy approaches him, he is jostled by a bearded man in a long coat. The boy gives him a package containing Eisenheim's notes about the orange tree trick, which Uhl has been unable to figure out. He asks the boy who gave him the notebook, and the boy replies, Herr Eisenheim. He realizes he was the person who jostled him and stole the locket. He chases after the man, but the man boards a train and escapes. Uhl realizes the jostling and the notebook are a message from the illusionist and begins to rethink recent events. He concludes that Sophie and Eisenheim staged her death so that she would be free of Leopold, with her ghostly apparitions being nothing more than phantasmagoria. Uhl laughs delightedly at the brilliance of their plan. Far away, Sophie and Eisenheim start a new life together in a cabin at a beautiful mountain. Eisenheim places Sophie's locket in her palm.
Okay, so one of the things I struggle with this movie a little bit, and it's the movie is by design showing us things and never explaining how they're done. So think about the sword trick, right? He gets this guy the crown prince's sword and he makes it stand, and then people can't lift it. Like a bunch of people come up and try and lift it, they can't lift it. And then even the crown prince goes to lift it, he can't until Eisenheim basically releases it. Now this could probably be done with a magnet, but we don't see any evidence of that, and it doesn't seem to affect anything else that's metal at the time.
Be a big magnet too. Be a big strong magnet. Electromagnet probably.
Very powerful magnet. And so much so that it would affect other things, and there's a guy who tries it who's he's wearing, I think he's a general, he's wearing a bunch of medals. So I was thinking they would probably be affected. But okay, maybe it's really specific kind of magnet that has a very narrow range or something. I don't know. I can come up with some explanations, but ultimately they're not satisfying, and I feel a little frustrated that I don't know how he could do that. And then you're left to think, well, maybe he's just actually a magician. And the movie loves this. The movie wants us to feel like maybe he's actually a magician, I think, time and again. And one of the reasons that I also say that is that there are times when the movie uses computer graphics to get the effects that are supposed to be magic performances that the characters in the scene are seeing with their own two eyes. And if I see CGI, that tells me that something truly magical is happening, because they weren't able to recreate it on screen without the help of CGI.
So specifically, the orange tree though is a real trick. They just happen to use CG for it.
Right. Or I was thinking about all this stuff with the spirits. There are times with the kid walking through the crowd, and his hand passes through him, and you could tell this was done with computer graphics, right? Some sort of special effect, and not the way that it's being done in person is my point.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too, because like I said, this phantascope stuff was real too. There was some projection stuff that they were doing in that.
I doubt they had kids who could walk through the crowd though. I would assume it would probably be fixed on stage in probably one position. Maybe probably it could move a little bit.
Well, and let me read something else that I found when I was looking. That I guess if you're an eagle-eyed viewer and you knew what you were looking for, they have a couple of times where you can see he has the things in the workshop that could potentially perform certain tricks that are unexplained, which is cool. But like you said, could be frustrating if you're not a person who knows how these tricks are done or something.
Right, but also the way they're being shown is telling, I don't know, I guess it's they're trying to engage with the legend of it, because the legend of it, the people who were there believed it, and so we're showing it in the way that the perspective of someone who believes it.
So let me read this bit that I found. The method for creating the ghosts as shown to Inspector Uhl involving the projection on a pre-recorded image into a hazy background was actually a real thing. Since the ghost, by the way, that was also the director. Neil Berger was the man who was like being projected for Uhl.
Oh, that's funny.
Like the lesser projection version, that was a cameo by the director. So kind of cool. Since the ghost Eisenheim conjured could speak to and interact with the audience, he was most likely using a different method popular among magicians of the time. A phantoscope was used to illuminate a real person off stage, and the image was reflected off a mirror or glass plate, creating a ghosted image. The lanterns that Eisenheim tells his assistant to leave behind when they are packing up the workshop bear a strong resemblance to phantoscopes. So there's that's sort of our real world like way that someone could say like, oh, it's not all magic.
Right. Okay.
But it does border on the, like you said, walking through the crowd and some of that other stuff borders on pretty much impossible.
Yeah. And I think that the movie is doing that deliberately, right? Because I do think they're trying to engage with an ambiguity of, is this guy actually magical or not? Because the longer we're able to believe that maybe he is, the more we're willing to get fooled by what's happening. And much like the commissioner, you kind of have to believe in the magic itself, because he has to believe that the vision of Sophia he's seeing is actually Sophia's ghost, because she is deliberately dropping little hints about the locket, which Eisenheim knows is planted evidence along with the jewels that he's planted to frame the crown prince. And it all relies on the commissioner believing that what he's hearing is actually a ghost, giving true account of how she died. And it also counts on him just like paying enough attention and not missing anything. It's very elaborate. The how elaborate this plan is does border on incredibly unrealistic. But I mean, a lot of the times this kind of stuff does go this way, but this is a very elaborate one that has a lot of variables that have to go just right for them, and a lot of it relies on like the commissioner making very specific decisions.
And I wanted to talk about how you can kind of view this whole film as a one giant performance for Uhl, his biggest fan, too. Like ultimately, of course, the trick was to get Sophia out of there and both of them to live happily ever after. But the only person who he leaves hints for and he gives the book to at the end is Uhl. And it's all this big performance for one person, this huge elaborate plan to, obviously, Uhl's the police chief or whatever, so you need to convince him so that he's not after you. But then he ultimately, like, he's a man of the law, but then he's been fired, and he's realizing all this at the end, and he's sort of laughing at it, and you're like, dude, that means that you were wrong, you were outsmarted by this person, so in the eyes of the law you were incorrect and you just imprisoned, or there was a coup in place, so he did inform of something that was going to happen potentially. But the idea of him then just sort of laughing and being a fan of it and being like, oh, you pulled the wool over my eyes on this.
That laughing scene goes on a little bit too long for my liking, too. Like,
yeah.
he is full on having a belly laugh for a while in that train station.
Would have been tough to convince Giamatti to just like pull that off, like just trying to get the performance out of the act.
And again, I don't think that scene works if the director isn't assuming that the audience is also like amazed at the wool's being pulled over their eyes and now it's being revealed.
And I can definitely see some people not having the context that we had, and we also saw the film before, coming in and maybe not picking up on everything.
I will fully admit the one thing I do remember is that moment at the end, the reveal, was a surprise to me the first time I saw it.
Okay.
So I remember I didn't know. Now, I was a different person back then. I didn't watch movies as closely. I think I was, who knows what state of mind I was in when I saw it, but this time around was very different, and I just think that's going to be a very different reaction from audience members depending on where they're at watching the movie. It didn't necessarily ruin the movie for me. It just was a very different experience watching it, fully understanding that I'm watching a trick from the moment they have the conversation, because I was like, all right, we just laid out the problem. We need to be dead, quote unquote, for him to ever leave us alone. So now they have to they have to like stage both of their deaths.
Yeah,
and somehow fool him. And I knew that right from that moment on in the movie that was the goal.
The trope of like drinking something and being like convincing people that you're dead, and all, like they did.
There is some medical.
A little bit.
There is some medical truth to that. Like there are things that can slow your heartbeat down like low enough to where if someone were to take your pulse, they wouldn't really feel anything.
It seems that people in movies have quick access.
I mean, I believe Eisenheim knows that more than some of the other stuff that goes on in this movie. But but like it's so like she's floating in a river
Yeah.
with that drug in her. That's dangerous. You very easily drown when you're in that state. I did think, and maybe I'm completely wrong on this, but for a moment, when they first find her floating in that river, there is a famous painting called Ophelia, and it shows Ophelia in a dress, and she's laying in the river. I don't know if she's dead. I think she might be dead. I forget the story of Ophelia. Sorry, I think it's like a Shakespeare thing. But I remember this painting, and I thought that maybe that the director was trying to evoke that. I went back and watched it a few more times just because I was like, "Oh, is this really? Am I onto something?" And then I pulled up reference, and I was like, "Maybe not. Like it's not that close, but I don't know. Maybe you're onto something there." So I want to give him credit for that. I always think it's cool if you can take a famous painting and somehow incorporate it into a scene. It's just like a little thing that almost nobody's going to notice, but me occasionally apparently, and I'm going to get excited when I see it.
But it is really smart by cinematographers to rely on masters who've thought about all these and the lighting situations and try to pull from that, because it creates, for like you said, really interesting imagery.
I'm not sure that this was intentional. I will say that, but it was close enough.
That is a thing that people do often.
It is the thing that happens
for sure.
Yeah, occasionally.
And I do want to note that the director of photography, Dick Pope, was nominated for best cinematography.
And I thought this
Academy
movie had
Award
great cinematography. Specifically, I was thinking this. It looks amazing. The use of shadow and light and that sepia tone, like we said, that evokes the time period. That was all cool. Man, there's some fantastic mustaches. If you're a fan of spiky,
impressive,
large mustaches, there's a lot of them.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking damn, I don't even know if I have decent facial hair, but I don't know that I could get the shape that these people so sharp edged and symmetrical. So symmetrical though, and everything. It just is impressive. I did also read that some of the actors got really into it and learned and were trained by actual magicians for sleight of hand techniques, and Edward Norton had some of that.
There were moments with Edward Norton doing some stuff where I was like, he's really doing that.
Which is cool. You love to see that, right? And even there's the ball trick that he does when he's a boy, the flashback version. He really does that sleight of hand bit there, and when he's learning magic. So I always think that's cool. And again, that sleight of hand on screen, showing it, that magic, I think there's something awesome to the way that somehow invention and magic and film all kind of coalesce if you look into the history of a lot of it. And I just think it's really interesting and cool to talk about. And I'd love to revisit it with The Prestige, because Christopher Nolan absolutely is digging into that.
Yeah. I am curious now to cover. We should at least cover The Prestige next year. Because I do want to cover it at a time where this movie's still kind of fresh in mind, so we can compare and contrast a little bit. But yeah, diving back into this movie a little bit, it's very elaborate, right? So he also begins a spiritual movement by summoning these apparitions, and he's doing that all to set up this moment where he's going to summon Sophia. While the Crown Prince is in the audience, he has to know the Crown Prince is going to show up because she's...
And he's in disguise.
In disguise. He's in this room. I think it's an exact thing she says, right? Has to land on the... It's all for the commissioner. Like you said, it's all performance for him. And it's in a sense him trying to frame the Crown Prince. And that comes to another point where I'm just a little frustrated just from I feel like I've been burned now by reality, where I'm just this sort of narcissist with all this power, you're not going to shame him into committing suicide over a crime that he didn't commit. And just the idea of the police rolling up on him and him killing himself, I was like, no way, man.
Well, it was because of the coup. It was because of his dad. It was his dad's people who had actually jurisdiction over him, and it was because the coup was informed to his dad. So his dad was not about being.
I guess I don't know, man. Just he seems like such a narcissist. I just feel like he's gonna keep fighting this until the bitter end. I don't know.
Yeah. You're probably right. In reality,
it's a little easy for him to just, off himself. Okay. I thought it was fairly smart. You set up a situation where the Crown Prince orders the police commissioner to figure out how he's doing these tricks. That is your task now. That is your job. And ultimately, he's unable to do it. But it really puts a microscope on these tricks for me as an audience member trying to figure out how he's doing it. As I'm watching, I'm like, how is he doing that? How is he pulling this off? But the answer seems to be special effects on the part of the filmmakers, because we don't really get answers. Now, I guess maybe you're saying maybe there's some things in the background or whatever, but nothing to truly sell what's happening on screen. So, and once again, I look at the sword, that's never really addressed. how is he doing it is left ambiguous. And we are, I think, supposed to see it as maybe he was actually magical, maybe he wasn't. And I just don't know how I feel about that. Ultimately, I do know that it leaves me a little bit dissatisfied. And it's one of the things holding back, like keeping this movie back for me, is I don't know that it is love the way that the magic was handled and the ambiguity of is it or is it not true magic.
So I'm with you. I understand the frustration at the end to be like, I feel like we should have understood the tricks a little more. I get that. But I also do think at the end of the movie, if you're willing to go along that journey, I think it's saying everything was a trick all along. It was an illusion, and illusions do hold power because...
It's saying that with words, but the movie we've watched has not been saying that.
But so I think him giving specifications of the orange tree to the cop is him saying like it was all a trick, and even like the dying, the projection, like all of it was a trick all along, and we see that because they are still alive, obviously, and they're not spirits.
Yeah, she was really being projected. That's the only way that could have happened if she's still alive. She's not a spirit, obviously.
At the end of the movie, they're saying everything was fake, but doesn't matter because the people were still tricked and things still worked out for them. But I do agree that, like, I guess it would have been better to get one or two more tricks shown to be like everything was fake all along.
I just want some confirmation that he was faking the spirit stuff. I don't know. Yeah, maybe even if you don't show me exactly how it's done, just confirmation that it was a trick. More than just him saying it, because like that's not enough. Like I need to see confirmation of it. I don't know.
Well, and the confirmation of the orange tree being a trick wasn't enough either, right? Like, because I thought symbolically that was him saying.
No, because that's a very different trick. Yeah, and like, that was very early on. That wasn't the one that was like truly. I see what you're saying, though. I do think that was like the nod the filmmaker was giving in that direction. I just don't know that was enough for me.
That makes sense, yeah. Because, like you said, that's kind of the early feats where it seems like feasible, and then these things that seem impossible, he should have also been shown to them be fake, and then that would help to I think, like you said, like solidify the vision of being
maybe you're saying there are a few items that might have been able to like help do that, like show a few of those during an investigation, and like maybe show a space under the stage or something, like do something to imply like yes, this was a trick that just would have gone a little further for me. Or there was a mirror somewhere or something that they find, just like some more stuff like that. The other thing I want to touch on here at the end, the final fate of our main character is that he is now living in a cottage in the middle of nowhere with the love of his life, but it's a tiny ass little cottage, and we are to assume that he just like is going to be content not being who he was, like not being Eisenheim anymore. Like I guess maybe there's nothing stopping him from being a performer in the future, but like it did feel like the movie was saying, oh, he lives happily ever after now, and this is his life. And like I just don't, like I'm like, real life doesn't work that way. This guy has a passion for performance and for being this magician, and like he's learned all this stuff. Like he's got to continue that, right? Like, I just don't buy that he's going to go live on a farm now. He's going to be bored.
Yeah, he's just doing a one-man show for Sophia, and then eventually that leads to their divorce. Like, he just, like, can't... He needs her to be enthralled by his magic, and she's like, enough!
What was I watching recently? It was, I know what it was. It was Sandman. We were watching Sandman, and there's that character who says, it's David Thewlis. He says, your stories always have a happy ending because you know where to end them, or something like that. And it's like the idea that like if you go on long enough, everything becomes a tragedy. And maybe that's just what it is. Like we're ending at this moment where everything's blissful happiness. But yeah, a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, who knows what it looks like out on that cottage. Yeah. Maybe they're like, you know what, this isn't working out. We're done. Right. We actually don't know each other that well.
Right. We knew each other as kids.
Yeah. It is just kind of a very like love. It's like this, star-crossed lovers with society keeping them back, and it's a happily ever after ending. That does feel more appropriate for a romance.
Yeah, classic romance story structure.
It's a little bit of an odd fit for me in this movie.
I think so too, but I think there's probably a good section of the audience who really enjoyed it, and like went in on that.
True, and that's very subjective, So I'll grant you that. So ultimately, I had a good time with this movie, and I think it holds up. I liked it. I noticed there was like he was swirling the red bottle a couple times. Like there are the little hints of like things that the commissioner's just missing, where like it's like, okay, that was used to do the thing that you're like investigating. So there were a few times where I felt like he was very clever when he needed to be, but then like would completely miss stuff when it was plot relevant for him to miss it. Like the conversation in the train station where he's talking with this guy and he's like, knows what she's getting in for, right? Yes. And like the commissioner doesn't put together that he could possibly be talking about Sophie, even though he's investigating this in this moment. And he doesn't even remember this conversation until later. And then he's like, oh, that's what he was talking about. And I'm like, come on, man, this is your job. So there's a little bit of frustration for me with that, and like just how elaborate the plan was, and involved like taking down a fucking crown prince and framing him, and then also like starting a spiritual movement, and like all this stuff that had to go just right to make it work. But it's just believable enough to where you can buy into it and have a good time. I thought the movie looked great, has some strong performances. So ultimately, yeah, I think it is a good movie, and I had a good time with it.
I agree on all counts. I think I like this movie more than I thought I did. I remember enjoying it, and walking away now, I'm like, yeah, I like this movie a lot. I think like I would recommend people check it out. Like I said, I think it's sort of going to continue to just be this like, I don't know what's gone on with it, but I never hear anyone talk about this movie really.
The Prestige just has like more darkness to it, and more of that. Like I feel like the magic and the question of what is and isn't real, and what is a performance and what is true, all of that is just done better in the Prestige.
There's some weird shit in the Prestige too that takes some logical jumps.
Sure,
that we'll get.
No,
to
I do remember that. But like I'm just saying, like I think when people are thinking like I'm gonna watch a movie about magic, they're gonna go to Prestige over this movie.
I think so, yeah. I think the name of the director helps as well.
It does, yeah. That's true. Okay, so the last thing we need to do is cast our votes. What was better, short story or movie? You go ahead and start.
So for most of the reasons we have already stated, I think that the film is going to be my winner here. It brought a lot to the film that I felt like in the short story I was missing, and it came down to sort of some of that narrative structure that you were talking about as well, where it reads. I'm just more accustomed to a sort of a narrative to get invested in and to go along with. And it felt like it was more of like this like historic retelling or historic biography of someone. And it was interesting to note like the ways that the tricks still showed up. And I think there's a lot of good bones in the story with like the relationship of storytelling and magic, and the perception of what an audience is getting out of it and what they bring to it. But ultimately, I like this movie a lot. I think visually it looks great. I think the performances are good, and they bring a lot into it that helps carry along the idea I think that was set up by the story.
So for me, I already said I'm not like the biggest fan of the short story, but I do think it does the ambiguity better. I think it works better in a short story. I think the idea of like, was Eisenheim actually a magician, or was it all truly illusion? That question resonates for me better in that medium. The movie has a bit of hokiness to it. It has that romance plot that I'm not the biggest fan of, although I don't mind it, to be honest. But yeah, a few things that are a little too convenient, and just a lingering discomfort I have with the way the magic was ultimately handled. And feeling like I was being fooled by movie making tricks when I want to be fooled by the actual trick that is being performed on stage by a person in this time period. And it feels a little like I don't know, dirty poker or whatever. What's the term? Probably not dirty poker, but you know what I mean? Like it's like someone's kind of cheating a little bit in a way that frustrates me by doing it that way. So I'm tempted to give it to the story, but ultimately I do still think it's the movie because of a lot of the things that the movie does right. And ultimately I do think a lot of the connective tissue that was brought in was smart. The use of the commissioner as an audience stand-in, as a fanboy, but also a threat. And then also he has this turn where he kind of becomes a hero-ish at the end, or at least we like what he did. That all works pretty well. So it is going to be the movie as the more enjoyable of the two, and ultimately I think the best version of this story.
Interesting that like the prince, Sophie, like a lot of that stuff just isn't even in the short story, and to bring all that in, you could have. And ultimately I do think that there's a better version of this film. I think if they sort of solidified a few more things and knocked them out of the park, but
they had this phantasmagoria explanation. It seems like when you were looking into it, that should have been more in the movie. say that word. Reference a little bit how a trick like this is done. They got a little bit of it. I just want a little more. Anyway, I like covering this. Real quick before we go, I want to talk to you about our upcoming quarterly project. So if you would like to suggest something, I'm going to have a link in the show notes that's a post on our Patreon. Go on there and you can vote on what titles you're most interested in. Anybody can by liking the comment. So there's a bunch of comments under there. We've been collecting them all year. And whichever 4 titles have the most likes, we're going to put into a poll that will go live on Patreon on November 22nd. And it will run from November 22nd to November 25th. And then on the 25th, that'll be the final day. Get your votes in. And then basically on the 26th, we're going to start reading. So we need to know what we're reading. So make sure you pick something on there. It has to be a movie so that we can cover it in a condensed time frame. But we'll do one episode on the book, one episode on a movie for a project of the community's choice. And if you want to be able to vote on that final poll, you do need to be a patron. So, sign up at any level and you can vote on the poll. We'd love to have you on there. And your support helps keep us going. Honestly, we're at the point where our income has dropped a little bit this year, and we want to get it back up to the levels of sustainability, making sure that we can do this without taking a loss. So truly, we're fairly small creators, and we would really appreciate the help.
Yeah, and also keep in mind we have to cover the book in one episode, so don't recommend a massive tome.
Yeah, that would just be a little easier for us if it's not a 1,200 page tome.
Not that we won't. If you put those things up there, though, we will see it, and we will come back around to covering some of that stuff in the future. So definitely try to get your vote out there just to see what our community wants to hear us read.
I know we're all tired of voting now, but we are asking you to vote one more time. I'm once again asking you, what is that, the Bernie Sanders meme?
I'm once again, asking for your support.
Yeah. But we're also going to be off next week. We're going to be releasing a From the Vault episode, and then we'll be coming back with that quarterly project, which also will be our 250th Ink to Film episode. So that's exciting. I don't know if we'll talk about it. I don't know if we're gonna do anything special or not, but that's a big milestone,
huge number. Yeah.
And we'll retouch it in the next one. And I just want to say shout out to Sarah, who recently let us know that she borrowed her sister's phone and left us a rating on both Apple Podcasts and on Spotify. So that's the kind of can-do attitude I like to hear. So if you've already left us a review, borrow someone else's phone and leave us another review.
I love it. Thanks, Sarah. That's really awesome.
Yeah, hopefully I'm not calling her out too much here. Truly, thank you. It's awesome. We loved it. We love that, and it helps get us up the rankings. And if you haven't left us a review, please do so.
And make sure to connect with us on social media: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, at Ink to Film, and TikTok. We're still on Twitter. I guess we'll be there till the bottom falls out from underneath it.
Yeah, I'm it's kind of burning down around us right now. But there's a lot of really funny stuff being posted.
Oh man, the fake corporation ones are absolutely killing me.
The fake corporations, costing like big pharma billions of dollars and all this stuff. Like, it's still an interesting place, even as it is all burning down around us. We'll see. But for now, we're still there. I'm also on Mastodon now, but I don't even know how to give my link to that. But that's just my personal account. I don't know. If Mastodon's something that you'd be interested in interacting with Ink to Film on, I guess let us know. Or you can just interact with me. That'll be maybe I'll include that in the show notes. I'll find a way to link to it, since I am on there now. And if you'd like to support us on Patreon and be able to vote on that poll, patreon.com/inktofilm.
And thank you to Russ Bugden for the use of our intro and outro music.
All right, that's going to be it until after Thanksgiving, so we hope you all have a good holiday, and until next time,
keep adapting.